This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi Glatstein, this evening we're going to examine a topic at the end of the Parsha, which is a very, very important topic. The Torah tells us that Moshe, who was the greatest individual who has ever lived, and his brother and sister Miriam and Aaron, they had a conversation. And the Torah tells us in Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Aleph, V'tedaber Miriam v'Aaron b'Moshe alaydos ha'isha hakushis ashalakach. Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moshe regarding the Cushite woman that he took. Ki isha kushis lakach. He took a Cushite woman. Now actually, Rashi points out, Moshe Rabbeinu did not marry a Cushite woman. She was not a Cushi. In fact, Sipora was from Midian. But what does the pasuk mean? Moshe Rabbeinu took a woman from Midian. Rashi says, who was so beautiful that when you looked at her, les man de pale, kulei alma loy plig, everyone agreed she was a beautiful woman. The same way, the black is black. You can't argue, there's no dispute, there's no machlokes. When you looked at this woman, everyone agreed she was beautiful. However, Moshe Rabbeinu separated from his wife. And Miriam and Aaron had a problem with that. And their problem was, who does Moshe Rabbeinu think he is? They said, we're Nevi'im. Hashem speaks to us. And Hashem never told us that we have to separate from our spouse. So what, Moshe Rabbeinu thinks he's greater than us? Moshe Rabbeinu thinks he's greater than Avraham? God never told Avraham Avinu he has to separate from Sarah. God never told Yitzchak to separate from his wife. God never told Yaakov Avinu. So who does Moshe Rabbeinu think he is? Right? The pasuk continues. Vayomru harak ach b'Moshe diber Hashem. What? Hashem only speaks to Moshe. Haloi gam banu diber. He speaks to us also. Vayishma Hashem. And God listened. Says the Torah, V'ha'ish Moshe anav na'od mikol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble man who ever lived. Rabbi Glatstein, what does that got to do with the price of tea in China? What does that have to do with anything? Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron and Miriam are talking about Moshe. They're criticizing Moshe. They're claiming that Moshe Rabbeinu is maintaining a standard that he should not. So why is the Torah telling me that Moshe was an anav? It's true, he was an anav. He was quite humble. He was even the most humble man who ever lived. But it's irrelevant at this juncture in the Torah. Why at this point do we need to know that Moshe Rabbeinu was very, very humble? Chafetz Chaim writes that the Torah is stressing the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was very humble at this point to teach me that Moshe Rabbeinu did not take the criticism to heart. Normally, you criticize someone who is arrogant, forget it. They're beroiges, they're angry, they're upset. How dare you criticize me? How dare you say that I'm unworthy of something? So the Torah is saying, no, despite the fact that Miriam and Aaron criticized Moshe Rabbeinu, nevertheless, lo hikbid. He wasn't makbid. He didn't take it to heart. This is the explanation of the Chafetz Chaim. Tonight we will explore perhaps another explanation. Why it is so important for the Torah to tell us at this juncture in time that Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble man who ever lived. Okay. For the next part of the Shiur, okay, Rabbi said, we're going to make believe we're scientists. We're going to examine certain information. Right? What does a scientist do? He goes in his laboratory and he examines information, and before he draws any conclusions, before he makes any decisions, he gathers the information, and after gathering all the information, only then does he formulate an opinion. So our job right now, for the next small amount of time, is we are going to collect information from Shas, from the Poskim, regarding a very interesting idea. The Gemara in Megillah tells us that when Hashem offered the Torah on Har Sinai, there was a big dispute. There was a big fight. Other mountains came in, and they claimed, we've been waiting for Hashem to give the Torah on us. The Gemara Megillah says, look at number 3. Darash bar kapar. Mai dichsiv. What does the pasuk mean in Tehillim? Lama tiratzton harim gavnunim. Why do you, majestic mountains, why do you contend? Yatzis abaskov amar lahem. A heavenly voice went out and cried out to the mountains, Lama tirtzadinim Sinai. Why do you strive and contend with Har Sinai? Kulchem balei mumena atem etzel Sinai. You are all imperfect. You are all blemished in comparison to Har Sinai. Says the Gemara, you know what we learned from here? Shmami, no, we learned from here. Haiman diyahir bal mumhu. That someone who has gaiva, an arrogant individual, he's blemished. In other words, we may look at someone who's a bal gaiva, and we may think he has bad character. We may think he has bad midos. Says the Gemara, he's worse than that. Someone who is a bal gaiva is blemished. There's an imperfection with his character. The same way if somebody would have a certain handicap, he would be considered a bal mum. A bal gaiva has a handicapped personality. That's what the Gemara says. Haiman diyahir bal mum. A bal gaiva is a bal mum, and the Gemara is telling us, this is something that everyone is familiar with, that although God could have given the Torah on Mount Everest, He could have given it even on the Catskill Mountains, right? He chose Har Sinai because it was the most humble mountain. Okay? Take in the information. What we're seeing is God focuses on the Anavim, the humble. In fact, the Gemara tells us, we're not going to read it inside, the Gemara 2 blot later in Masechta Megillah, in number 4 tells us, wherever the Tanakh talks about the greatness of the Ribono Shel Olam, immediately it says, God's not interested in the great, mighty people. He's interested in the humble. For instance, in the Chumash it says, Hashem is the God of all gods, the master of all masters. What does it say right after? Who is He busy with? The Yasim and the Almana, the orphan and the widow. In the Nevi'im, we learn this on Yom Kippur. We say, God, Koyam Aram V'Nisa, God is exalted on high, and yet, where does Hashem find Himself? V'yastako Shval Ruach. He associates with the downtrodden. And finally, in Ksuvim, there's a pasuk, Soilu, L'roiche Ba'arabais, Hashem, the Ribono Shel Olam. He rides the highest of heaven, so you think, who's Hashem interested in? He's interested in, the big rollers, the heavy hitters. God is interested, says the pasuk, Avi Yisaimim V'dayin Almanas. So what do we learn from here? Okay, we're seeing a certain pattern. And the pattern is that God's interest is with the humble, the lowly, the small. Right? If we were to ask, what are the most famous words in all of Mishnayos? Right? In the entire body of Mishnah, you'd have to say the most famous words are Moshe, Kibel, Torah, Sinai. Right? Everybody knows that. Moshe received the Torah from Har Sinai. Now, the more familiar something is, the more well-known something is, the less people think about it. People take it for granted. People, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. If you think about it, this statement is grammatically incorrect. Who gave Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah? The Ribono Shel Olam, right? It should say, Moshe Kibel Torah me'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does it mean? Moshe Kibel, what? There was a man named Sinai, and Sinai gave Moshe the Torah? It should say, Moshe Kibel Torah, Bis Sinai, Al Har Sinai. What's Moshe Kibel Torah, Mi Sinai? What, he received the Torah from Har Sinai? There is a comment of Tosfos on Pirkei Avos. There's something called Tosfos Chadashim. The Tosfos Chadashim writes something very interesting. The Tosfos writes, in Hebrew, the letter Mem could sometimes mean not from, but rather because of. For instance, in Sefer Eicha, in Megillas Eicha, it says, Mechatas Niviyeha, because of the sins of her prophets. It doesn't mean from the sins of her prophets. Mechatas Niviyeha means because of the sins of her prophets. When we say Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, you know what it means? Not that the mountain gave Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah. Moshe received the Torah because of a lesson that he learned from Har Sinai. What was the lesson? Moshe Rabbeinu saw that why was Har Sinai selected? Because it was the most humble, it was the smallest, it was the most shafal, it was the lowliest mountain. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, hey, I see something from here. I see that when God chooses somebody or something, He chooses the humble. It is this lesson that Moshe Rabbeinu learned from Har Sinai, that Moshe Rabbeinu, was selected to be the recipient of the Torah. In other words, Moshe kibel Torah, says Tosfos. Why was Moshe selected to be the one to receive the Torah? Mi Sinai. It's because of the lesson he learned from Har Sinai. Okay? So we're just taking in information without commenting. Har Sinai was selected because it was the most humble. Moshe Rabbeinu was selected because he was the most humble. Think about it. Throughout Jewish history, there are only two individuals that we call our Rebbe. Throughout history, there are two individuals we call our Rebbe. Who? Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rebbe. Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Parsha B'chsav, the oral law. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was the redactor of the Mishnah. Right? Rebbe. Who else do we call Rebbe? Rebbe. Okay, every Tana is called Rebbe Akiva, Rebbe Tarfain, Rebbe Gamliel. Every rabbi is called Rebbe. But Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is specifically given the title just Rebbe. Okay? And we see an amazing thing, Rabbi say. If you look in the last Mishnah, Masechta Soita, says the Mishnah, look at number 8, Mishemes, Rebbe, Batel, Anova. When Rebbe died, there was no more humility. He was the last of the Mohicans, right? Anybody who maintained after Rebbe that he is an Anov, there's no such thing. Rebbe was the last of the humble people. So we see an amazing thing. Two people in history, they are our teacher, they are the greatest individuals we've ever had, and at the same time, what do we say about Moshe Rabbeinu? He's Anav Ma'od Mikol Ha'adam Asher Pnei Adama. What do we say about Rebbe? Mishab Meis, Rebbe, Batel Anava. Okay, again, Rabbi say we're not explaining it yet. We are just allowing the information to enter our minds, and we will explain it soon. By the way, there are many, many Gemaras and Shas that talk about the Anava, the humility of Rebbe. For instance, the end of Horiyos, Daf Yudalit, the Gemara says, even Rebbe, who was an Anav, he did a certain thing. In other words, the Gemara is holding up Rebbe as an example of what humility is. Or the Gemara says in Gittin, the Gemara says, very interesting thing. The Gemara says that when it comes to capital cases, you need to start from the greatest dayan, and then you work your way down. When it comes to monetary cases, you begin with the greatest one, and you work your way down. When it comes to capital cases, you start with the lowest one, and you work your way up. Says the Gemara, in the court system of Rebbe, it didn't work like that. In the court system of Rebbe, he always began from the bottom, because he didn't want to take credit for himself that he was the chief dayan. So although the halacha strictly dictates that when it comes to capital cases, start from the top. When it comes to monetary cases, you start from the top. Rebbe had a different procedure. Okay? It's very interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu, he's our Rebbe. He's the most humble man who ever lived. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, also. Mishameis, Rebbe, Batal Anava. We're going to digress for a few moments. If you look throughout Shas, you will notice there's a certain terminology that is used when Rebbe says his opinion, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that you don't find anywhere else in Shas. And that is, when Rebbe talks, Rebbe Omer, Omerani, I say this and this and this and this. You don't find that by any other Tana. You ever see Rabbi Akiva Omer, Omerani? You ever see Ram Gamliel Omer, Omerani? You ever see Rav Tarfon Omer, Omerani? You ever see Rabbi, anybody? Nobody. Not Rav Meir, not Rabbi Yossi Aglili, nobody. Not Hillel, not Shammai. But when it comes to Rebbe, all of a sudden, Rebbe Omer, Omerani, I say. You're kidding me, you say. What? Who else is saying it, you know? Rabbi Akiva's saying it. If it says Rebbe Omer, we know it's Rebbe saying it. We know it's obviously not Rabbi Akiva. For instance, in the Gemara Megillah, look at number 12. Rebbe Omer, Omerani, Hoil, V'nizchu, Ayaros Mimakaiman. Rebbe says a certain halach about the Megillah, that once cities are pushed off from reading the Megillah on a certain day, they get pushed off completely. And I was always wondering, what does this expression mean? Rebbe Omer, Omerani. I came across a fascinating comment in the Sefer Beis Ha'otzar. Who wrote the Beis HaOitzar? Rav Yosef Engel. Who's Rav Yosef Engel? Rav Yosef Engel was the Av Beis Din of Krakow in the later part of the 19th century. Right? I believe Mr. Cooperman is one of the Suridim of Krakow. Is that correct? Right. So Rav Yosef Engel was one of the Gaonim of the city of Krakow. He was born in 1859. He passed away in 1920. He's the Av Beis Din of Krakow. By the way, the Rav Yosef Engel was a Goyin Adir, a Baki in Torah Shebechsav, Torah Shebal Peh, Kabbalah, Chasidus, everything. I'll tell you a very interesting story. One time, two women came to Rav Yosef Engel, and they had a dispute about their laundry. What happened was they both claimed they brought laundry to the laundromat, and they claimed that this pile of laundry belonged to them. So they come to Rav Yosef Engel, and Rav Yosef Engel is supposed to decide who all these shmatas belong to. So Rav Yosef Engel says, go home, come back tomorrow. Leave your shmatas here. But so they leave the shmatas there. Rav Yosef Engel tells his wife, take all your dirty laundry, pour it into the pile. Okay, so his wife pours the dirty laundry into the pile. The next day the two ladies come back, and Rav Yosef Engel says, no, whose laundry is this? The first one says, Kula Shali, it's all mine. The second one says, it's all mine except for those socks and that shirt. So Rav Yosef Engel says, okay, that's the right owner, right? Anyway, Rav Yosef Engel, who is a Baki B'Shas, quotes about 20 instances in Shas where it says, Rabbi Omer, Omerani. For instance, he says, the Gemara in Kedushin, Daf Tes, the Gemara in Gittin, Lamed Ches, the Gemara Lamed Tes, the Gemara Nun Beis, the Gemara in Erchin Daf Yud Zayin, the Gemara in Erchin Chaf Dalet, the Gemara in Tainis Daf Beis, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Chaf Beis. And he quotes dozens of Gemaras where it says, Rabbi Omer, Omerani. So you'll say, maybe, it says that expression by a different Tana. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, I searched throughout Shas, there is no mention of Omerani by any other Tana except Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. By the way, he says in the Tosefta, one time it says, Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, Omerani, but nowhere in Shas. And therefore, Rabbi Yosef Engel wonders, what does this expression mean, Rabbi Omer, Omerani? And he says the following. He says something very interesting. Rabbi Yosef Engel says in his first answer, if you learn a shtickle in the Pnei Yoshua, you learn a piece in one of the Achronim, and they're answering a question. How do they introduce their answer? They say, Nira lefi anios taiti. They always answer, it would seem according to my impoverished mind. In other words, let's say Rabbi Akiva Eger. He's asking a question. So to give an answer to a question takes a certain gumption, it takes a certain azus to answer a question. So Rabbi Akiva Eger, the Pnei Yoshua, will always preface their statement by saying, it would seem, Nira lefi anios taiti, it would seem according to my humble opinion. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, that is exactly what Rebbe was doing. Rebbe was saying, you don't have to follow my halacha. I'm not telling you what to do. Omerani, this is what I say. You don't want to listen? You don't have to listen. I'm not somebody that important that you need to listen to what I have to say. Omerani, that's my humble opinion. As we know, Rebbe was so humble, like the Gemara says, Nishames Rebbe batal anava, and therefore Rebbe's practice was always to introduce his opinion with the words Omerani. Rabbi Yosef Engel says another explanation why Rebbe said Omerani. And this is a little bit, he says, Al-Pi Kabbalah. And he says the following. Rabbi Yosef Engel says the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, they focused on always understanding that whatever they did, whatever they said, wherever they were able to go, it was not their inherent ability, it was the kayach that Hashem was giving them. Hashem gave them the ability to walk. Hashem gave them the ability to talk. Hashem gave them the ability to achieve certain things. Very interesting thing. The word ani doesn't always mean I. For instance, on Hoshana Rabbah or on Sukkot, we walk around the bima and we say, ani v'hai Hoshiana. Ani v'hai Hoshiana. What in the world does that mean? Ani v'hai Hoshiana. we've probably said it hundreds of times in our life. What does it mean? Ani v'hai haishiana. Says Rashi in Masechta Sukkah. Rashi in Daf Memhei, you can look at number 15. Ani v'hai is bigematria, has a numerical value of Ana Hashem. Okay, very nice. Says Rashi further. We know that Hashem has a 72-letter name. There's a certain thing that we don't know what it is. Big tzaddikim in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, they knew God's 72-letter name. Where is God's 72-letter name alluded to? Says Rashi in Masechta Sukkah. If you look in Parshas Vayishlach, there are 3 psukim in a row that have 72 letters. Pasuk number 1 is Vayasa Elokim. Pasuk number 2 is Vayet Moshe. Pasuk number 3 is, the first pasuk is Vayasa. The second pasuk is Vayavai Ben Machane. And the third pasuk is Vayet Moshe. 3 psukim in a row that have 72 letters. Says Rashi. There are 72 different permutations of putting together these letters. If you take the first letter of the first pasuk, is a vav. You take the last letter of the second pasuk, is a hey. You take the first letter of the last pasuk, is a vav. That's the name Vahai. Vahai is one of God's names. Likewise, says Rashi, the word Ani is one of God's names. We think Ani means I. Says Rashi, Ani is a name of Hashem. Rashi says like this: if you take the 37th letter of the first pasuk, the 37th to last letter of the second pasuk, the 37th letter of the third pasuk, it spells out Ani. That's what Rashi says. Okay, this is not the Zayar. Rashi and Shas. Therefore, Rashi says the word Ani is the name of Hashem. I'll bring you a raya. The Gemara in Masechta Sukkah and Daf Nun Gimel, look at number 16. It says that when Hillel Hazaken came to the Simchas Beis HaShoeva and the Beis HaMikdash, what did Hillel say? Im ani kan, hakol kan. If I am here, everyone is here. What was Hillel saying? If I'm here, everyone. Hillel was a big Baal Gaiva. If I'm here, everyone is here. Says Rashi, Ani is the name of Hashem. Im ani kan, if God is here, then everyone will come. If the Shekhinah is somewhere, then you don't have to worry. The people will follow. But if the Shekhinah is not present, then nobody will be there. Ani, we see in Shas, Ani is the name of the Shekhinah. By the way, we would like to suggest that maybe that is what Hillel meant in Pirkei Avos. Im ein ani li, nili. If literally it means if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But according to what we see from the Gemara, that Ani is really the name of Hashem. Im ein ani li, if God is not with me, mi li, then it's hopeless. Says Rav Yosef Engel. You know what Rebbe was saying? Rebbe was saying, Omerani. That's like a way of saying, before I even talk, Hashem sefasai tiftach ufi yagid tihilasecha. That I can't even begin to open my mouth without the help of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That is what Rebbe meant in Amar Rebbe Omer. Omerani. He wasn't talking about himself. This is the ability that God has given him. This was the anivos of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Okay? So we've given 2 explanations what Rebbe meant. Omer Rebbe, right? Rebbe Omer, Omer Ani. Either it's a way of saying, Nira lefi ani es daiti, or what Rebbe meant was, this is the kayach, this is the ability that God has given him. Rabbi Yosef Engel continues. Okay? He doesn't stop here. He says, if Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is the only one who ever used the expression Omer Ani, then let me give it a try. Let me try. Is there anywhere in Tanakh where the words Omer Ani appear? That would be quite interesting if we could find somewhere in Tanakh where the words Omer Ani appear. Sure enough, says Rabbi Yosef Engel, look in Sefer Tehillim, Perek Memhe. Look at number 19. Look at this. This is amazing. Lam natseach al shoishanim levnei kairach maskil shir yedidos. Rachash libi davar taiv oimer ani ma'asai lamelach. So we found the words. Oimer ani. Whose words are those? Who was the one who always said those words? No, we just said. Who was the one who always said the words Omer Ani? Rabbi. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, it's amazing. Take the words Libi, Davar, Taiv. Libi ends with a Yud. Davar ends with a Reish. Taiv ends with a Beis. Soifei, Tevais, Rabbi. The last letters of the words Libi, Davar, Taiv spell out Rabbi. What did Rabbi say? Omer Ani. He would always say Omer Ani. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel. What was Rabbi's main contribution? The Mishnayos. Was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi technically allowed to write the Mishnayos? No. The Gemara says in Tamura that really you're not allowed to write down the oral law. You're not allowed to write down Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right? Devarim Sheba'al Peh Yatar Rashoy Lichtavein B'Ksav. You can't write down Torah Sheba'al Peh. What right did Rebbe have to write down the Torah Sheba'al Peh? Rebbe said the following: Eis lasois laHashem. There's a time to act for Hashem. Heiferu Torah. Sometimes you have to break the Torah to uphold the Torah. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, this pasuk is a nevuah about the history of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Listen to this. Rachash libi davar tov. My heart has a good idea. Whose heart is it? The one who always said, Omer Ani. Who is that? Rabbi. And again, libi davar tov, spell out, soifei tevos, Rabbi. What was the idea? Ma'asai lamelech. I have to act for the king. Eis lasois laHashem. There's a time to act for Hashem, for the king. L'shoini, that which I say with my tongue, Torah Sheba'al Peh, 8 soifer mahir, you have to write down. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, this pasuk is a nevuah about the contribution of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. You hear? Rachash libi davar tov. My heart has a great idea. Whose heart? Libi davar tov spells out Rabbi. Whose idea? Omer Ani, the one who always said Omer Ani. What was the idea? Ma'asai lamelech. You have to act for the king. By doing what? L'shoini 8 soifer mahir. My tongue, Torah Sheba'al Peh, you record in writing. Mamish, half love a fella. Half love a fella. It's a wonder. Says Rabbi Yosef Engel, he's not finished. The word L'shoini is the gematria Yehuda HaNasi. The word L'shoini is the gematria Yehuda. You hear this? Rachash libi davar tov spells out Rebbe. Omer Ani was Rebbe's statement. What was the contribution? Ma'asai lamelech. What was it? L'shoini 8 soifer mahir gematria Yehuda HaNasi. Okay. So we're getting a little glimpse. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was not your ordinary anav, right? Mishames Rebbe, Batla Anava. He was the last of the Mohicans. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest anav who ever lived. He's our teacher. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, also one of the greatest paragons of humility, Rebbe. Let's move on in history. Again, we're not explaining it. We're just taking in the information for him. Who then would we say is someone that the entire Jewish people lean on? Kol Beis Yisrael Nishan Olav. Bet Yosef. That's Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch.
You're going back in history.
Going forward.
Okay.
Right? We're going forward. Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef. Rabbi Sai, look in number 21. The Chida writes in the Shem HaGedolah. This is also. Look, if you count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down. Says the Chida. that he has a tradition that he was makabel from an Adam Gadol, who accepted it, who had a tradition from Zikanim. That in the times of the Beis Yosef, look what he writes. Uva Oisai Hadar Hayu Nimtsaim Shloisha Rabbanim Ru'uyim Lazeh. In the times of the Shulchan Aruch, there were 3 Gedolei Yisrael who were worthy, qualified to write the Shulchan Aruch. We would think a work like the Shulchan Aruch, it's only one in a generation who could write like that. Not true. Says the Chidah, there were 3 Gedolim who could have written it. Who are they? Not the Rama. Look what he writes. Vehem Harav Morenu Rabbi Yosef Titchik, the Harav Moran and the Beis Yosef, the Harav Maharivil. So probably nobody ever heard of the other 2. The only one we ever heard of was the Beis Yosef. But the Chidah is saying there were 3 people who were worthy to write the Shulchan Aruch. The Rabbi Yosef Titchik, the Maharivil, and the Beis Yosef. The Chol Echad Mehem Haya Roy L'Malachazu. They were all capable, they were all worthy to do it. So why did Hashem allow the Beis Yosef to write it? The Hiskimu Min Hashamayim the Tinasein Das Al Yedei Maran HaKodesh. The Beis Yosef was given the ability to write it Mipnei An V'Sanusai HaYesera, because he was the most humble. It's an amazing thing. Chidas not saying Beis Yosef was a bigger Lamdan, was a bigger Tzaddik, was a bigger Talmid Chacham. No. There were 3 people who could have done the job. Shamayim allowed the Beis Yosef because of his tremendous anivos. By the way, the Chidah goes on to explain, what was the big anivos of the Beis Yosef? When he rejects somebody who he argues with, he never disparages them. He doesn't put them down. He doesn't say, Ein loy mayach v'kad kadai. He doesn't criticize them. He just argues with them. It's an amazing thing. Now, so we would say the following. We're reading this. We're saying to ourselves, Rabbi Yosef Titchik? Who in the world is Rabbi Yosef Titchik? The Marivil? Who in the world is Marivil? It's like rewriting history. Of course the Beis Yosef was the greatest. Now you want to say after the fact why he was writing it, because he was the biggest honor. So let me tell you a little bit. Who was Rabbi Yosef Titchik? We'll see who we're dealing with. The Chidah writes, also in the Shem Vidam, look at number 22. Chidah says, give you a little taste who Rabbi Yosef Titchik was. And you know who the Beis Yosef was competing with. Arbaim Shana Vayashen B'mita. 40 years, he didn't sleep in a bed. V'hayayashin agabe teva. He slept on a box. V'raglov tluyos. And his feet were hanging over. V'kam b'chatzos. He got up midnight every night. Okay, so you say, come on, but he doesn't compete with the Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef, didn't the Beis Yosef have an angel that came to learn with him? Says the Chidah, Rabbi Yosef Titchik also had an angel that learned with him. A little bit down, the Chidah writes, V'hayalei magid al der shahil amaron. He also had a malach. Beis Yosef didn't have any longer of a seder with an angel than Rabbi Yosef Titchik. Okay? So here we have Rabbi Yosef Titchik. He learned with the angel. He learned with the malach. He didn't sleep on a bed for 40 years. By the way, the Reishis Chachma writes, also he didn't sleep on a bed for 40 years. The Chidah writes in his commentary to Pirkei Avos, number 24, that Rabbi Yosef Titchik's daily seder went the following way. 18 hours a day he sat and taught Talmidim in the Beis Medrash. 6 hours a day he left for his sleeping and eating. And during those 6 hours a day, that's when he wrote his hundreds of tshuvas. 18 hours a day was Kodesh Kadashim, where he did not budge from the Beis Medrash. Okay, this is who we're dealing with. This is someone who was worthy to write the Shulchan Aruch. By the way, who is the other person the Beis Yosef was competing with? The Marivayel? The Seder Hadoros brings down, somebody once started up with the Marivayel. There was an earthquake the next day that killed 200 people. Documented in history. So we're not talking about, Beis Yosef and two regular Joes, as they say. We're talking about Amudei Olam. And nevertheless, the Beis Yosef was selected not because of his lamdas, not because of his chachma, which he had, Not because of his gainus, which he had. Not because a malach learned with him, he had that too. Mipnei an v'sanusai hayesera, because of his great humility. Okay, Rabbi say in your leisure time you could take a look. This is not just Moshe Rabbeinu. This is not just Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. This is not just the Beis Yosef. Kahena v'chahena, the verdict of history, the pattern of history is. The Stipler writes that the Pri Megadim, there were Gedolim in the times of the Pri Megadim who were equal in halacha to the Pri Megadim. And the reason why the Pri Megadim was accepted as an authoritative halachic work is because the Pri Megadim would not issue a halacha. He would just, everything the Pri Megadim writes, Sarachian. Pri Megadim would never say, do this, do that. Everything is Sarachian. In fact, the Pri Megadim writes in his introduction, you cannot rely on what I'm saying for halacha. He didn't want it. And nevertheless, we rely on every single thing the Pri Megadim says. Whenever he says Sarachian, we rely on it. It was because of his tremendous amivos. Okay. But, we move on. So again, we're still taking in the data. We're still taking in the information. God selects Har Sinai because it's the most humble. God selects Moshe Rabbeinu because he's the most humble. God selects Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. God selects the Beis Yosef. It was because of their humility. By the way, the Shlach HaKadosh writes something very interesting. We know there were many humble people in history. Avram Avinu. What did Avram Avinu say? Ve'anoichi afar va'ifar. I'm dust and ash. David HaMelech. What did David HaMelech say? Ve'anoichi toilas v'leish. I'm a worm. Says the Gemara, but Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest anav. Because dust and ashes, it's not a big deal, but it exists. A worm is not exactly, the best thing in the world, to be a worm, Nobody's vying to be a worm. But nevertheless, it has an entity. Moshe Rabbeinu went beyond that. Moshe Rabbeinu said, V'nachnu ma. What am I? Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm not even dust and ashes. I'm not even a worm. I'm nothing. That was the Madriga Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Shlach HaKadosh. Moshe haya anav ma'od mikol ha'adam. Adam stands for Avraham, David, Moshe. But Moshe, Moshe was the top. Ve'hayish Moshe anav ma'od mikol ha'adam. Adam is Avraham. Fine. So now that we've gathered in all the information, right? We've taken it in. We've recorded it in our books. Har Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu, Avraham Avinu, David HaMelech, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the Beis Yosef. What's the pshat? What's the pshat? Is it a coincidence? They happen to be great individuals, and they also happen to be humble. Or is there something more to it? Is there a direct correlation, perhaps? Is there a direct connection between the fact that these people were so humble and their greatness? Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner in his comment, Ruach Chaim, on Pirkei Avos. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Tainis, to look at number 32. Torah is compared to water. Look at number 32. Torah is compared to water. The Gemara in Masechta Tainis wants to know, why is Torah compared to water? Says the Gemara, Loimar lecha teaches you. Ma mayim manichin makoim gavaya veholchin lemakoim namach. What is the characteristic of water, right? Sometimes you take a cup, right? You drop it. Why does it drop? Gravity. How does gravity work? It doesn't matter how it works, but it works. The cup is going to drop. Says the Gemara, the Torah is like water. Just like water goes from the highest point to the lowest point, Torah will only be sustained. Ela b'misha daitoi shefela. Let's read the words. Loimar lecha teaches you. Ma mayim manichin makom gavaya v'holchin l'makom namach. Just like water goes from a high place and goes to a low place, after vrei Torah ein meskaimin ela b'misha daitoi shefela. Torah rolls to the lowest point. Torah moves. It's on the go. The same way there are laws of nature and there are laws of physics, there are laws of Torah. The same way you drop a cup, it's going to fall, right? Unless you're on the moon, the cup's going to fall. Torah, there are certain laws of Torah. And the laws of Torah are, it goes to the lowest point. Right? There's a famous question. Why did God give the Torah to Moshe? Why didn't he give it to Adam HaRishon, to Noach, to Avram, to Yitzchak, to Yaakov, to Yosef? The answer is, Torah goes to the lowest point. V'ha'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol ha'adam al-pnei adama. God waited to give the Torah to Moshe because the Torah follows the laws of Hashem. And the laws are, the same way water goes to the lowest point, Torah goes to the lowest point. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner an amazing thing. Look at number 31. In the second paragraph, Beha'inyan. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, it's not a coincidence that Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest man and he was also the most humble man. No. It was because he was the most humble man. That is why he was the greatest man. Because he was so humble, that's why he was the greatest. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, Beha'inyan. Ki hal yedei ha'anava zoiche ha'adam hakol. Every spiritual achievement comes through humility. U'kamay Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom. Shahaya adoin hanaviyim. He was the greatest prophet. Va'av ha'chachamim. He was the wisest man. And yet, look in the Chumash. What compliment does the Torah give him? Do we say, Moshe, you're the best. You went up to Sinai, you got us the Torah. Moshe, you're the best. You took us out of that Egypt. Moshe, you're the greatest. You split the sea. We don't say one word about that. The only compliment we give Moshe Rabbeinu is V'ha'ish Moshe anav ma'od. The only compliment we give him is his humility. You know why? Because that's where everything came from. That's where it all started. Loi nishtabeach ela ba'anava. The only compliment he's given is his humility. B'chol ma shezacha hu ba'avur anvasa. Everything he achieved was because of his humility. Now listen to the following line by Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Ve'ilu haya achshav adam anav k'Moshe. If today, in the year 2012, you would find someone who was as humble as Moshe, haya vadai zoicha l'Torah b'shleimus, he would reach the madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not because Moshe was the smartest. It's not because he was the biggest goyim, the strongest, the wisest, the biggest Baal Bitachon, the biggest Baal Tzedakah, nothing. It's one thing. Everything was because of his humility, and the Torah slopes down to the lowest point. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, it's like a kli, it's like a vessel. Right? It's like a vessel. If the walls of the vessel are wide, so it can't contain that much liquid. You chisel away from the walls, and you make the vessel as small, as narrow, as thin as possible, the more it could contain. The smaller a person makes himself, the more humble a person is, the more of a base kibul he is, the more of a receptacle he is for the Torah. Okay? Let us conclude with the following. So we're learning Hashem likes the humble. He chose Har Sinai, he chose Moshe, he chose Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he chose the Beis Yosef, he chose Moshe. I have a question for you. What is the holiest spot on earth? Har Moriah. Har Moriah. Could someone tell me, why was Har Moriah chosen? You find anywhere that Har Moriah was a humble mountain? You find anywhere that Har Moriah exhibited this kind of character trait that would account for all the things we're learning, right? We say all spiritual attainment is through another. So why was Har HaMoriah chosen? If you heard this from me, don't give it away. That one. What? So listen to this. Listen to this. There's a Mishnah Masechta Avodah Zarah on Daf Mem Hey, right? The Mishnah says like this. Rabbi Akiva says the following. I will show you, if you go to any mountain in the land of Israel, every single mountain is a place of Avodah Zarah. Look, the Mishnah says in the Masechta Avodah Zarah, Kol makom sha'ata moitzei har gavaya v'giva. Any place in Israel that you find a mountain or a hill, the Yetz Ra'anan or a leafy tree, da sheyesh sham avodas kazana. You should know that they served idols there, and therefore You cannot make any mountain in the land of Israel a place of Kedusha, because before we got to the land, the Goyim, the Canaanim, already served Avodah Zarah there. And if you serve something which is even mechubar l'karka attached to the ground, it becomes Avodah Zarah, and therefore any mountain or hill in Israel is disqualified from being a Makam Kadosh. So the Yerushalmi, quoted in Tosfos, asks the obvious question. So how in the world do we build the Beis HaMikdash on Har HaMoriah? If every single mountain is a Makam Avodah Zarah, how do we build the Beis HaMikdash on the mountain? Says Tosfos, quoting the Yerushalmi, Al Pi Navi Nivneh Sham. It was built because through prophecy. What do you mean it was built through prophecy? If a prophet comes and tells you to sin, you know what you do with him? You kill him. So what Tosfos is saying, it was built through prophecy. What was the prophecy? Rabbi Akiva is saying, I know every single mountain in Eretz Yisrael was worshipped as idols. Comes along the Chassam Sofer in a tshuva in two places. In Arachayim Siman Reish Ches and in Yeridea Siman Reish Lamed Gimel. And the Chassam Sofer quotes his Rebbe. Who is the Chassam Sofer's Rebbe? Rav Nosson Adler. He calls Chassid Shebekahuna. Says Rav Nosson Adler, you think Har HaMoriah was always a mountain? It wasn't always a mountain. Look in the Medrash Tanchuma. Look at number 36. Vayar es hamakoim meirachik. They saw the place from far. Wait a second. It's not a mount. It's not a place. It's a mountain. Why are we calling it? You know what a makoim is? A makoim is air. Air is a place. A mountain is not a place. It's a mountain. Says the Medrash Tanchuma, number 36. Me'alamed shemetchila hayamakoim amaik. At first, Har HaMoriah did not exist. Didn't exist. Not only was it not a tall mountain, not only was it not a small mountain, not only was it not flat, it wasn't there. It was Amaik. It was a valley. And Hashem said, that's my place. That's my place. Kivan Shamar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lishvar Shechinasei Alav V'Lasis Mikdash. Hashem said, that's my place. Avram said, no, come on, you need a mountain. So Hashem said, fine. Hashem made a miracle. He gathered the earth together. Har HaMoriah was turned from a makoim into a har. That's the pshat in the pasuk in Tehillim. David HaMelech says, Ad emtza makoim l'Hashem. We can't just build a Beis HaMikdash on a mountain because every mountain is disqualified because it's a place of Avodah Zarah. What we need is something that wasn't a mountain, and that the Jewish people got there before it turned into a mountain. So says Rav Nosson Adler, how did they build the Beis HaMikdash in Har HaMoriah? At first it was a valley. Avraham Avinu comes to the valley, and he says, God, turn it into a mountain. It turns into a mountain. What does Avraham Avinu do on the mountain? The Akedas Yitzchak. Avraham Avinu takes possession of Har HaMoriah. So later, when the Goyim come and do Avodah Zarah on the mountain, they can't take it away. Ein Adam Yachal Lasar Davar She'eino Shalai. A person cannot prohibit something that doesn't belong to them. So therefore, in order for the Beis HaMikdash to be built, Hashem had to give us a makom, which was not always a har, but was turned into a har. Says Rav Nosson Adler, this is what Tosfos means. This is what the Yerushalmi means. It was built through the Navi. The Navi was able to tell us that this place was not always a mountain. There was a time in history that it was a amoik, it was a makom, and it was turned into a har. By the way, very interesting. Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz, as well as the Rebbe of Heschel. Where's the Rebbe of Heschel from? Krakow. The Rebbe of Heschel was nifter in 1666. Very interesting. The Rebbe of Heschel was the Rebbe of the Shach. By the way, he wasn't Hasidish. This was before Hasidus. Very interesting. The Rebbe of Heschel, the Shla writes about him, he had the neshama of Rabbeinu Tam. Before the Rebbe of Heschel was the Rav of Krakow. Who is the Rav of Krakow? The Megala Amukais. At the end of the life of the Megala Amukais, he didn't have strength anymore. So he decided they need to appoint a new Rav. So the people of the city came to him and they said, who should we appoint as a new Rav? So the Megala Amukos, by the way, on his kever it says he had Gilui Eliyahu Panim Apanim. The Megala Amukos made She'elas Chaloim. He requested of the heavens. And he told them the following pasuk. Hineni oimed lefanecha sham al hatzur. That's what the Megala Amukos said. Hineni starts with a hey. Oimed starts with an ayin. Sham starts with a shin. Al, right, lefanecha is a lot, right? Hineni oimed lefanecha sham. Rashi Tevos Heshel. Al hatzur is the gematria Krakow. The Megala Amukos told the city, Reb Heshel is your new Rav. Hineni oimed lefanecha al hatzur. Hineni oimed lefanecha al, right? Heshel, al hatzur, gematria Krakow. And that's how they selected their new Rav. Okay. So if you ever need a Rav, you know what to do, right? Says Reb Heshel, based on this Medrash Tanchuma, that Har HaMoriah started out what? As a makom. It was not a mountain. It turned into a mountain. Vayikra Avraham Shem HaMakom Hahu Hashem Yireh. Avraham called the place Hashem Yireh. Asher Ye'omer Hayayim Bahar. That it will be said, today it became a mountain. Asher Ye'omer Hayayim Bahar. That's what Rav Heshel says. That's what Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshit says, based on this Medrash Tanchuma. It was originally Vayikra Avraham Shem HaMakom Hahu Hashem Yireh. It was originally a makom. But Asher Ye'omer Hayayim, today, this day, it wasn't always a mountain. This day it became a mountain. So Rabbi says, what we're suggesting is the following. We know Avraham Avinu was a very big unknown. We know David HaMelech was a very big unknown. We know Har Sinai was very humble. But they were on the level of what we call the Anoichi Afar Va'efer. They were humble, but they had an entity. But what was the highest level of humility? Moshe Rabbeinu. What was his madrega? V'nachnu ma. He's nothing. Har Sinai is very great. Har HaMoriah is even greater. Why? Because it's not on the level of Anoichi Afar Va'efer. It's lower than that. It's v'nachnu ma. It's nothing. It had no entity. It had no existence. So you'll ask me a question then. So why did Hashem choose Har Sinai to give the Torah on? If the Beis HaMikdash is going to be on Har HaMoriah, so you might as well give the Torah on Har HaMoriah also. So we're going to see something quite interesting. Look at number 41. Okay, we're almost done. Vayoytze Moshe es ha'am likras ha'alekim min ha'machane vayisyatzvu betachtis ha'har. They stood betachtis ha'har, under the mountain. What are the next words? Behar Sinai Ashan Kulai. Har Sinai was completely smoked over. First it says Hahar, then it says Behar Sinai. First it uses the pronoun, then it uses the noun. It should say the opposite. It should say Vayisyatzvu betachtis Har Sinai. They stood below Har Sinai. Then it should say V'hahar Ashan Kulai. The mountain was smoking. Why does it say they were under the mountain, and then it identifies the mountain? Says the Baal HaTurim, look at number 42. Betachtis Hahar v'Har Sinai, me'elamed she'nitlash hahar mimekaymai. A mountain was uprooted, v'nase kahar al gabe har, and there were one mountain on top of another mountain. You hear this? We're talking about two different mountains here. Vayisyatzvu betachtis hahar is one mountain. The Har Sinai is a second mountain. So what was the first mountain? Right? The Baal HaTurim is saying there were two mountains, one on top of each other. Okay, one we know is Har Sinai. What was the second one? Says the Yalkut Ruveni, look at number 43. B'shas Kabbalas HaTorah Nekar Har HaMoriah Ubal Midbar. When the Torah was given, God uprooted Har HaMoriah and brought it to the Midbar, Kedei Shetinasem HaTorah Al Makom HaMe'ula Hazeh, so that the Torah should be given on Har HaMoriah. So you'll ask, why did Hashem select Har Sinai? Why didn't he choose Har Moriah? They were both selected. It was one mountain on top of the other. The two Anovim, Har Sinai, Har Moriah, they were both selected. But of all the places on earth, the holiest place on earth is Har Moriah, because it had the Anivos, greater than Avram Avinu, greater than David HaMelech. It was greater than just Va'anoichi Afar Ve'eber, dust and ashes, greater than Va'anoichi Talas V'yish. It was on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, V'nachnu Ma. V'nachnu Ma. Har Sinai was the smallest mountain, but even more humble than the mountain was the origins of Har Moriah, which was not even a har, it was just a Makayim Amoik, and in that Zechus, that became the Makayim Kadosh. So what we're learning, a very important lesson. The ones who God directs their attention to, the Torah rolls down to the lowest source. The holiest man, the greatest man who ever lived, was Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's go back to the beginning. Aaron and Miriam, they had a taina on Moshe Rabbeinu. What was their taina? Their taina is, Moshe, who do you think you are? Avram Avinu didn't separate from his wife. We didn't have to separate from our wives. You think you're greater than everybody else? Says the Torah, yes. V'ha'ish, Moshe, anav ma'od, mikol ha'adam ha'pnei adam. The Torah is explaining. Moshe was greater than everyone else. Where is the Torah saying that? If you're saying he's the most humble person, he's more humble than Abraham, he's more humble than Sarah, more humble than Yitzchak, more humble than anyone, that by definition means he's on a different standard than everybody else. The Torah is coming to address the tainus of Moshe, Miriam and Aaron. They think Moshe is equal to the other Nevi'im. Says the Torah, no. V'ha'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol ha'adam asher pnei adama. Have a great evening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.